the spring of 1970, the war in Southeast Asia was no longer confined to battlefields or borders. It leaked through mountains and jungles like smoke, quiet, invisible and deadly. While the newspapers reported on troop movements in Vietnam and protests back home, another war was being fought in silence across the border in Laos. No flags, no headlines, just coded transmissions, sealed orders, and men whose missions would never be acknowledged. Lieutenant David Rains was one of those men. Officially, he didn't exist. He flew under no squadron. His uniform bore no insignia. His orders came not from military command, but through channels he never asked about and could never verify. Rains was a pilot for Air America, a CIA front operating in the shadows of the Vietnam War. His job? Fly cargo, personnel, or surveillance missions deep into denied territory. Sometimes it was rice, sometimes it was radios, and sometimes, though no one would ever confirm, it was weapons and informants, headed straight for the jungle, where no one was supposed to be fighting. Rains was 28 years old. He'd been a Navy pilot before being recruited into the shadows. Tall, calm, and sharp-eyed, he carried himself like a man who had seen more than he let on. Most who met him thought he was quiet. Those who flew with him said he had a sixth sense about the sky. When to drop low, when to cut the engines, when to disappear into the tree line. On May 17, 1970, Rains was handed a sealed envelope at a small CIA base in Long. Ting, the envelope bore no return mark. Inside was a mission card and a photo of a hillside. Village near the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The mission was marked priority, and the margin note simply read, "Extraction time sensitive." No deviation. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Before takeoff, he called his younger brother Tom on a scratchy military phone line. "You still writing that book?" he asked. "Trying to," Tom laughed. "You still flying ghosts?" Rains smiled, the kind of smile that said everything and nothing. "Keep writing. I'll have something good for you one day." Those were the last words Tom Rains ever heard from his brother. At 300 hours under a moonless sky, Lieutenant David Rains lifted off in a modified Cessna 02. He had no escort, no radio contact, no backup, and he never returned. The jungle below was a vast, breathing labyrinth choked with mist shadowed by cliffs, and stitched with trails that had carried the weight of wars long before his. David Rains flew low just 30 feet above the treetops. The roar of his twin-engine O2 muffled beneath the canopy. There was no moon, only the occasional burst of lightning flashing in the east, silhouetting the jagged ridges of the Annamite Mountains. He moved like a ghost across a border no one officially recognized, into a sky thick with silence. The mission profile said extraction, but there were no coordinates. No confirmed cargo, no known friendlies. Just a village pinned near the Ho Chi Minh Trail, marked in red ink on a map that wasn't supposed to exist. Rains had been flying missions like this for months, each one more opaque than the last. Names disappeared. Villages burned. Helicopters landed and never lifted again. He learned early not to look for patterns, not to ask for follow-ups. But this mission felt different. The air carried a charge he couldn't shake. At 0348, 26 minutes after takeoff, Rains crossed into the designated zone. The terrain opened into a narrow valley, thick trees, rising like pillars on either side. And in the center, a clearing marked by a faint light. Not fire, not flare, something else. Maybe a signal, maybe a trap. He circled once. No movement. He circled again. Then a flash, not from the ground, from the hills. Anti-aircraft fire. He yanked the controls hard, right? Banking away just in time as tracer rounds zipped past his left wing. A second burst tore through the sky behind him. Instinct took over. He dropped altitude, cut engine to idle, and let the plane slip between the trees like a falling leaf. Then came the scream. Not from him. From the radio, suddenly alive with static and a broken voice. "Ghost bird. We see you. Smoke south." But it was garbled, fragmented, a whisper shoved through the teeth of a storm. And then silence. He tried to reply. "Say again, ghost bird reading, do you copy?" Nothing. He banked once more toward the valley, heart pounding, eyes scanning for a landing strip, a flare, a figure, anything. But the clearing was gone, swallowed by mist, or never there at all. That was the last confirmed transmission ever received from David Rains at 0407. His transponder vanished from the CIA's emergency tracking grid. No beacon, no impact, no debris. Back at Long Tieng, a junior analyst flagged the missing signal. A supervisor glanced at it, frowned, and placed a red stamp on the file. Mission aborted. Asset presumed lost. But there was no rescue party. There was no report to the Pentagon. There was only silence. And somewhere over a forbidden jungle, a man had vanished, alone, unarmed, and unknown. The official story, of course, was that there was no story. The mission didn't happen. The aircraft didn't fly. And Lieutenant David Rains? He was relocated, not dead, not missing, just moved. Somewhere, somehow, in paperwork that no one outside of certain halls in Langley could access. His name disappeared beneath black ink and compartmentalized designations. And for a while, that was the end of it. But stories like his don't stay buried, not when someone remembers. Back in Northern Virginia, Tom Rains waited for his brother's next letter. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, one had always come. They were never long, just sharp bits of thought, snapshots of sky and dust and silence, but they were personal. In one, David had described the way jungle air smelled at dawn. In another, he mentioned a village elder who smoked cigars made from banana leaves. Each note was a breadcrumb, a signal that his soul was still intact. But after May 1970, nothing. At first, Tom assumed it was the mail. Delays were common. Then he started asking. First, David's friends from the Navy, then their mother's congressman, then the Pentagon. Each time, he got the same answer. There is no record of a Lieutenant David Rains operating in Vietnam or Laos. Full stop, but Tom knew his brother. He knew the man who taught him how to ride a bike in the rain, the one who showed up to his college. Graduation in a wrinkled uniform and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew David had gone somewhere, and he wasn't back, not because he didn't want to be, but because something was wrong. So Tom started digging. He filed FOIA requests. Most were returned with large redactions or no documents responsive. He connected with journalists who specialized in covert operations and POW investigations. In 1975, he flew to Thailand to speak to former Air America mechanics. One of them, a man with a broken voice box and a drinking problem, remembered a pilot named Rains. Said he flew deep and dirty, the kind of missions that made everyone shut up. In 1978, Tom received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a faded photo of a man who looked a lot like David, sitting in a bar, holding a matchbook from Long Tieng. On the back, scrawled in uneven ink, it read, "He went farther than any of us ever did. Find him." But Tom never did, not then. By the 1990s, he had stopped asking, not because he had answers, but because no one else was listening. The Cold War had ended. Files were sealed. Eyes moved on. But David Rains still haunted the silence. And in quiet corners of government basements, his name still lived in classified memos, forgotten dossiers, and a single line in a long-lost flight log that read, "O2, departure confirmed. No return." The day after David Rains vanished, typewritten note was quietly added to a file at Langley headquarters. It read in full, "Ghostbird lost in transit. No recovery. Terminate file." The ink was still drying when the office was emptied. His belongings, what few remained, were boxed and sent to a storage facility under a number, not a name. There was no funeral, no flag-draped coffin, no folded triangle handed to a grieving family. His mother received a letter weeks later. It wasn't from the Department of Defense or the CIA. It came from a private forwarding address in New Mexico. It stated that her son had completed his service and transitioned to an undisclosed post. No further detail, no signature, just a note of ongoing appreciation for his contribution. She read it once, then tucked it away, and never spoke of it again. But Tom, he never stopped. By the 1980s, he was writing editorials, giving lectures at veterans groups, say, and publishing his findings on obscure forums and military newsletters. He spoke to anyone who would listen, war historians, POW investigators, ex-intelligence officers. Most told him the same thing. You're digging into something that was never supposed to be found. One retired Air Force colonel pulled him aside after a conference and whispered, There were missions in Laos that were never logged, not even in the black books. Your brother flew one of them. That's why you'll never get answers. And yet, something always pushed Tom forward. In 1997, nearly 3 decades after the disappearance, an anonymous source sent him a satellite photo. It showed a dense patch of jungle north of Paksay. The forest was unbroken, except for one faint, rectangular indentation, barely visible among the trees. Alongside it, a heat signature no one could explain. Tom took the photo to 3 analysts. 2 dismissed it. The third said, "It's a wreck, and it hasn't been disturbed." That was the moment everything changed. Tom mortgaged his home, sold his car, and hired a guide team. In November 1999, he and 2 local trackers hiked into the Annamite Mountains. The journey took 9 days. They slept in hammocks, crossed flooded rivers, and waded through elephant grass taller than a man. And then, on the 10th day, the jungle opened. Twisted aluminum, scorched rivets, and a rusted data plate. O2 Skymaster, serial 40297. Tom dropped to his knees. He didn't cry, not yet. Inside the cockpit, they found a fragment of a flight helmet, a broken compass, and a waterproof pouch. Inside it, a photo, yellowed by rain, edges frayed, of Tom and David as boys, sitting on the porch of their childhood home, one holding a model airplane. No words, no signal, but it was enough. They called in a recovery team weeks later. Not military, private, discreet, the kind you pay in cash and never ask for receipts. The site was documented, the remains collected, and the jungle was left untouched, as if it had merely borrowed a ghost for 30 years. DNA testing confirmed what Tom already knew. The pilot in the wreck was Lieutenant David Rains. But there would be no headlines, no press conference, no medals mailed in velvet boxes. When Tom approached the Department of Defense to request formal recognition, they denied any knowledge of a David Rains operating in Laos. Even when presented with evidence, the response was clinical. No such operation has been officially recorded. Therefore, no recognition can be issued. The lie was intact, polished, papered over by decades of silence. But for Tom, the truth didn't need paperwork. It lived in that jungle, in that photo, in the knowledge that his brother had flown into darkness, not for orders or glory, but because someone had to, because someone was waiting, and because, when no one else was willing, David Rains lifted off. The truth rippled quietly across a small circle of those who still remembered. Old pilots passed it on in bars and back rooms. Former CIA handlers nodded quietly when his name came up in conversation. A few Vietnam veterans began placing a second candle on their Memorial Day altars, one for the names they could speak, and one for the ones they couldn't. Tom eventually published a book, The Sky, that hit him. It never made a bestseller list, but it circulated quietly, on military bases, in history classrooms, in the hands of sons and daughters of those who came home from wars they weren't supposed to fight. In 2006, Tom received a letter from a retired Lao villager. It had taken years for the letter to find its way to him. The man claimed to have seen a small American plane circle his village in 1970. He said it flew low, as if looking for something, and then it vanished into the trees. He had assumed it was shot down. But later, he found a small box buried near the edge of the clearing. Inside was a flight patch. It said, "Ghostbird 1, we fly what others fear." The villager had kept it, unsure of its meaning. When he learned the story, he said only this: "The bird did not fall. It flew where the sky ended. That is not defeat. That is honor." Epilogue. Today, Lieutenant David Rains is still not officially listed on any memorial wall. His name isn't carved in marble or etched into brass, but it lives in stories whispered by pilots, in pages held tight by veterans, and in the heart of one brother who never stopped searching. And in the jungle where he vanished, the birds still rise at dawn. Some say you can hear a low hum when the wind moves just right, like the memory of wings slicing through forbidden sky. Not every hero dies with their name remembered, but some never needed it. They simply flew and never came back. Subscribe for Wings of Valor.